mean, the important thing to understand is that a lease is a legal document, and that it's really important that a tenant understands, as far as they're able, what they're signing up to. Now, for bigger companies who take leases, then obviously they've got departments who do this full time and they work on this and they know what to expect. But for a smaller business, for an individual trader, for example, they may not have seen a lease before. They may understand the sort of document it is, but they wouldn't understand what's in it. And because of the wording, which can be very legalistic, they may not understand what that means in each case. And it is really important to get a basic understanding of that. A lease is a legal document, and what a tenant has to understand is that once they sign up to that document, then they are signing up to all the obligations within it for as long as that lease continues. So, for example, if they take a lease on a shop for, say, 10 years, then even if they feel after 3 years that it's not the property for them, then if they signed up to that lease, then they still have the obligation to pay the rent and all the other additional costs that might be due for the rest of that lease. So it's quite a serious business, really. Obviously, a lease contains a lot of clauses. An average lease would be, probably 30 different obligations on behalf of a tenant. And all of those will have legal wording, around them. And the tenant doesn't need to understand every one of them, but it's important that the tenant does understand the principles around why those words are there. And if they are uncertain about what the words mean, then that they do find somebody who can give them advice on that. Because, at the end of the day, you need to know what you're signing up to. Normally speaking, when you're looking at taking a lease, you'll probably be dealing with the landlord's appointed representative, who might be an estate agent, for example. Yeah. And estate agents tend to want to do the deal, right? So it's really important, I think, that say you agree some heads of terms. Yeah, so the basic terms, the lease term, the demise, the rent, all that sort of thing. But I think at the outset, when you're agreeing those heads of terms with the landlord's estate agent, really push them to make sure it's as clear as you want it to be. Because when the landlord gets involved, you don't want any uncertainty about what you're asking for or what you think you've agreed with his agent. Yeah. So really take a bit of extra time to make sure you're happy with those heads of terms and they mean what they say. I think there are normally two areas you could get professional advice. I mean, you can get informal advice because, to be honest, people are happy to talk normally. So I wouldn't, where I would start as a tenant would be, to think about what sort of advice you're looking for and to ask around. So actually, on the internet, there's some quite interesting stuff about leases and lease clauses and advice on that. So it's well worth a trawl through the internet to see what you could find. Of course, you sort of need to know what you're asking and looking for in the first place. So I would say that's your initial thing, but maybe not the only thing you use. Yeah, I think it's really important that as a tenant, you think about, even if you decide not to think about getting some professional advice when you're taking a lease. I mean, it may be very easy for the landlord to hand over the lease to you and say, well, it's the rent you wanted, it's the property you wanted, just sign here. But of course, all the things we've talked about today tell you that there's a lot of other stuff that you really need to know. And frankly, if you just sign the lease, you won't know what you're getting. So it would be worth, on the sort of legal side, either looking on the internet maybe initially at some of the terms that you're seeing in the lease and thinking, well, what does that mean? Because there are sites like that around that can advise you. But maybe you ought to be thinking about talking to a solicitor, because they're the ones who've got the legal knowledge about the drafting of leases, assuming you get the right solicitor, of course. So somebody who's familiar with commercial leases. And maybe it's just an initial session to get advice, maybe an hour or whatever, to get advice on the things that you're uncertain on, which then give you the comfort to actually sign the lease yourself. Or it may be, if it's appropriate, you hand it over to a solicitor and he negotiates the lease with you with the landlord solicitor. That could get costly, and I think you need to understand up front and agree up front how much it's going to cost, and so you understand what the fees are and the time rates and everything else. I think in terms of the advice on some of the generalities of the lease, whether you're paying the right rent, whether it's the appropriate sort of lease to be taking in terms of the length of it and that sort of thing, then maybe a chartered surveyor would be able to help you with that. Again, somebody who's experienced in the commercial property side of surveying. And again, there are costs involved in that. So set yourself a budget and decide how you best achieve that.